And it's our tradition these days to have the first Sunday of the month be the spiritual journey of someone who participates in the meeting. And this is a part 2 for Bill Moninger, who was so recently our clerk. During the joys, I wanted to say, yay, Bill is going to do his spiritual journey. But I figured it would come up during announcements, and it did. So I am introducing Bill Moninger. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I want to thank you all. This is a rare opportunity to speak about really the most tender things in my 71 years to a group that I feel safe enough with to share these tender items and to be listened to for an extended period, maybe a little less than an hour, by loved ones. It's a rare privilege, and I thank you all for coming, and thank you for committee for asking me. The first time I did this was September 97, 18 years ago. I had a dream the night before that I was giving the talk at the old Crossroads shopping center, and the audience was sitting on a little wooden bleacher. And as I spoke, gradually people one by one would just get up and leave. And so I'll assume if any of you get up and leave that you're bored by or offended by what I said. I know some of you do have to go early. That's fine. I want to thank also the Library Committee for turning an inaudible, I mean, this was so long ago, Spiritual Journey #1, that we only did audio tapes, which I tried to listen to and couldn't some time after I gave it. But magically, the Library Committee, in converting all those old tapes to CDs, made it audible. And so I did listen just the other day to my first spiritual journey, but I put this one together before that. It was interesting to hear the similarities in what I was going to bring up and the dissimilarities. I'll talk about that toward the end. I'll start with my youth and the church of my youth. I grew up in Glencoe, Illinois, a wealthy suburb of Chicago on Lake Michigan shore. And I went to the Glencoe Union Church. It was a formerly a congregational church, but it had been independent for many, many years. I remember thinking as a teen that it was a pretty wishy-washy church. It was very plain vanilla, of all the sort of stereotypes about Protestantism might have applied to this church. And yet, I did get a spiritual hunger from somewhere, and yet the fellowship with my group, the youth group there, was very, very tight and meaningful. In fact, I still have coffee every week with a friend of mine from who grew up with me in that church. The sermons were pretty awful, but we had a good time anyway. I thought I saw a lot of hypocrisy there. Of course, this is through the eyes of an adolescent. There are probably adolescents here in our meeting who think they see the same thing. And yet, it in many ways set me on a good spiritual course. But some of the hypocrisy I saw revolved around my father, who was a pillar of the church. He was one of the elders, and religion was very important to him. But at home, he was an alcoholic. He had a successful income as an executive for the American Meat Institute. They're the guys that tell you how good red meat is for you. It would be, I think, a tougher job now than it was in the 1950s. But his role in the family, I learned early on, was to be the screw-up. And he was undependable. He was an alcoholic. He wasn't physically violent. He was pretty emotionally violent, mostly to the younger of my two older sisters. Not so much to me, but he would be not entirely there. If you've ever seen the movie Boyhood, there's a portion in there where they deal with an alcoholic, almost stepfather, that really portrays the anxiety and tension in an alcoholic home, enough so that it really sent chills down my spine. Mother was the trustworthy one, according to the family story, and she held everything together. I've learned since that things are a lot more complicated than that, but that's how I saw it growing up. I had lots of judgments pretty early on. Maybe some of you who know me well have seen signs of it even now. I remember when I was the age of losing teeth. I had a tooth that I could put under my pillow, and I was confident the tooth fairy would give me. I was old enough to know it was not the tooth fairy, but I wasn't going to admit that because I wanted the money. And so I made a big show of I was going to put it under the pillow, and but my mother was out of town that night, and so I knew Father had the job of being tooth fairy, and I sort of wondered, all right, is he going to screw up or not? And well, I woke up and there was a quarter under my pillow. I thought, good work. You know, I went into the bathroom and there was my tooth sitting on the side of the and I thought, he screwed up again. You know? And what was I, 8? And it's sad to think that I was judging, you know, my father was the screw up. Therefore, I had a really tight bond with my mother because she was dependable. And not only dependable, she was almost godlike. I had asthma as a child, and she would stay up at night rubbing my forehead as I tried to breathe. And after some years of that, they invented bronchodilators. And I remember vividly, middle of the night it seemed, she was saying, well, try this thing. And it was not like the ones we have now. It was a funny little plastic thing with a BB in it that you breathe in and it would hit a little salt shaker thing that would send the powder down into the airstream and into your lungs. And it worked instantly. Here, you could breathe. And she gave me that, and we shared a spiritual experience that I, after hours of not being able to breathe, all of a sudden could breathe. Breathing is kind of a theme that I've seen through my life. It was an incredibly bonding moment. As my sisters can tell you, I was a favored child. I didn't get some of the grief they got. I was the third child and the first boy. That was, I think, important to my father especially. A wanted boy and a treasured boy, because one of the things that happened is when I was 4 years old, we were driving from Chicago to Detroit on the highway, about 60 miles an hour. And I thought it would be fun to hang out the side of the car and fly like Superman. So I unlocked the back seat, the back door, and I opened the door. And it's one of these doors that opened into the wind, as they used to. And it threw me out, and I rolled on the pavement. And I remember thinking, the car's going, it was dusk. I remember they've forgotten me. Because I was conscious through the whole thing, and after I stopped rolling, they were still going. The car hadn't even stopped. But, of course, they did stop, and and I had only bruises, you know. There are those of my friends who think perhaps the problems ran deeper, but every Thanksgiving,
It happened at 60 miles an hour.
Yeah, it was, fortunately, we were on the right lane, and I fell out of the right side of the car. And my mother thought I would be all right when I was sitting on her lap, terrified, as we ran to the hospital. And I said, gee, Mother, I'm so glad I didn't fall out on the other side of the car. And she thought, well, I'm still thinking. So in grade school, we were asked, as I guess many kids are, to write an essay on our most respected adult. And though our church had nothing to do with Lutheranism, I had read about Martin Luther pounding out on the door of the cathedral his 95 theses of the way things really were. And I thought, it's really good to tell the truth, because in my family things weren't as true. You know, my father and mother would argue into the wee hours, and the next morning my mother would say, no, we weren't arguing, we were discussing. Well, I knew they were arguing, and I knew my sense of truth wasn't corroborated by my family. So Martin Luther, that looked pretty good to me. And the teacher, sometime later, queried my mother, said, I didn't know you were Lutheran. She said, well, we're not. And he said, well, it's strange. You know, he said, usually boys will write about their fathers on this essay. So, I don't know what the message was sent there. But anyway, so I have a nice connection. Stan, a former Lutheran minister, and I feel a particular simpatico because of that. The other event around truth was a TV show from Canada on public TV called Two for Physics. Dr. Hume and Dr. Ivy from, I think, one of the Canadian universities. And it was an old-fashioned TV science show. And they were kind of about the truth. I remember one show opened up, Dr. Hume, with his coat and tie on, was talking to the camera, and Dr. Ivy comes in upside down. His head's, upside down. And somebody says, well, Ivy, you're upside down. And he says, no, Hume, you're upside down. And they decide about how they might be able to figure out who's right. So they think they're going to flip a coin. And so Hume takes a coin and lets go of it, and it flies off the top of the screen. And then the camera pulls back, and here you see Dr. Hume, and these were very distinguished professors, in his suit, hanging upside down on a trapeze. And the camera turns over, and gravity then points downward. And I thought, okay, so physics is about getting to the truth. And I thought, that's pretty good. And I remember on a Saturday morning when I was 12, walking a block over to the grade school playground, sitting in the swing, and saying to myself, but aloud, I'm going to be a nuclear physicist. And I didn't end up as a nuclear physicist, but I ended up as a physicist. And it's not many people who are able to say, my boyhood wish came true in a good way. And I'm grateful for that. For all his difficulties, Father did give me music. He founded a boys' choir in our church, which hadn't existed before, about the time I was in 5th grade and ready to start singing. And ensured that I was involved in music, not pushed me, but made the opportunity available, which was centrally important to my life from age 12 to 52, or age 10 to 52, when some things changed that I'll mention. My father died when I was 20 of cirrhosis of the liver. He was 56, only 56. As I've passed that and gotten older and older, I see how much life he lost, not only while he lived, but by not growing old. When I was 17, I had what William James calls an oceanic experience. Through most of my high school career, I would walk on the Lake Michigan beach at night. I would walk the 20 minutes from our house down to the beach and then walk up and down the beach for maybe an hour or two in the dark, spring, summer, fall. I just loved doing it all by myself, and I pretty much had the beach to myself. I could look up at the stars, I could look out over the beach, I could look at the sand and just ponder the questions of the world. When I was a sophomore in high school, my good friend Ellen Antolini from a really tight church group of about 6 of us died of spinal meningitis. That's why it was so scary for me when Bonnie went in for tests last year when she had recurring fever that turned out to be fixable and easily fixable. And they were testing her for spinal meningitis. I didn't share that story with her until afterwards, but let's see, where am I? But about a year, I thought about Ellen, I thought about what I wanted to do with my life. I thought about the things many adolescents think about. I would call it now single-pointed meditation. I love doing it. And then one day, I looked up at the stars. I remember first there was a plane that went by. I looked up at the stars, and I could actually see the stars, not as points of light, but as real things. And not only that, I knew they were there and I was here. And I was absolutely as much a part of the universe as they were. And it's the kind of experience that St. Paul had on the way to Damascus, the scales dropping from the eyes. And it's the kind of enlightened experience that Buddhists talk about. I'm quite confident. It was a very special time, and I remember reveling in it and walking home and pausing before I opened the front door, knowing that I was going back into my prosaic, everyday existence. It was a very, very special experience, and for many years I was hoping for another one. And now I'm just grateful I had that one, because even though I'm not always aware of it, I was given a deep confidence that I have as much right to be here as the stars and the earth and the trees. And it's given me strength in times, in all sorts of strange times. There's an interesting video on the web that I just discovered in the last year or so. You can Google 1956 housewife LSD. And you'll come up with this very interesting 5-minute or so film taken during the LSD experiments of this bona fidely sane housewife about a few hours into an LSD experience, where she's saying so much that resonated with my experience. You know, she's talking to this interviewer, and he says, well, I'm seeing in Technicolor. And, you know, I couldn't possibly explain this to you if you can't see in Technicolor. So it's like what we're all seeing now in everyday life is black and white. And then if you imagine Technicolor on top of black and white, well, if you can imagine some kind of super Technicolor on top of color, maybe you get some sense of what this oceanic experience that has driven religion through the centuries is so like. It makes me kind of regret that the government decided LSD shouldn't be studied anymore. I guess it put a lot of people in emergency rooms. But I read there were a lot of, early on, interesting studies of LSD and religious experience that I could talk about another time. Okay. I'm going to give you some continuity now, not to make too many spiritual points out of it. Oh, no, not yet. I'm going to talk about what else happened when I was 17. This was in the spring of 17. And in the summer of 17, my mother and my sister and her girlfriend from England and I took a trip out west. First time we'd been out west. And she wanted to show me Colorado College, because she'd discovered this college. And my grades in high school were pretty terrible. I didn't worry about them until I started taking physics. And I didn't take physics till my senior year. And she thought Colorado College was a school I could get into. She didn't really know how good it was. But coming out to the West was an experience akin to taking the asthma medicine. I could breathe. I remember seeing the mountains. Well, oh no, they're clouds. Oh no, they're mountains, clouds, mountains, clouds. Well, oh God darn, there's mountains. And we went to Colorado College, which I fell in love with, and we went to the Garden of the Gods, and I remember scrambling over the rocks there, asthma-free, you know, because I was away from the stuff I was allergic to back home. And I can breathe here. The West was instantly, I knew it had to be my home. And and I'm pleased that life worked out, that I could come home. I did go to Colorado College. I had a wonderful, wonderful time there, musically and in physics. And then, in fact, my father died when I was on choir tour my sophomore year. So I left the choir to go home for the funeral and stayed for a few days, and Mom put me on a plane back to join the choir in New York City. And I remember standing in front of the hotel and seeing the bus come around the corner, and all the hands that reached out of the bus windows, you know, and all the hugs I got from all the girls. And when I rejoined the choir, and I couldn't have been welcomed back into a kind of womb-like community any better after that. And it was music. It was my father's gift to me. Graduate school, I went back to Illinois, kind of to be nearer my mother, and also because the University of Illinois said they would let me minor in music, which I didn't do, but I did do a huge amount of singing there at Illinois. And after getting my degree, I taught at Coe College. It's a small liberal arts college that I'd only heard of because my father went there. I really don't think it was honoring him, but it's just, I was aware of it, and there was,
It's right next to Cornell.
Yeah, indeed. Oh, you went to Cornell College. Cool. So I had some fun. I had a lot of fun at Coca. I loved teaching liberal arts. I taught physics, of course, but I also taught Introduction to Liberal Arts. I taught Camus and Freud, and it was just a ball, except that I was teaching it to 18-year-old kids off the farm. And so I was reading all this great stuff, and oh, wow, neat, great thoughts, and then, okay, now I got to teach it to freshmen. My college, Colorado College, had a similar course, but for seniors. You know, I wish College had something like that. And I started doing summer research in Boulder. I won't go into how I happened to find out about the lab in Boulder, but I came and visited one day, one summer, right after my PhD. A friend of mine was working there, and I thought, this is a place where I could learn to do a subject that I could share with undergraduates. Because I was in high energy particle physics, it takes big accelerators, and you don't do work like that with undergraduates, but studying the atmosphere you could do. Those summers in Boulder were just blissful. I was certain all I wanted to be in life was a liberal arts college professor. And so there was no pressure at all. I was probably the most creative I've ever been in those summers because there was simply no pressure. But eventually I started comparing my summers in Boulder, where I could breathe and felt life, with my winters in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And I thought, I think Boulder's where I want to be. And so I told my boss if there was a full-time job that could be available, I'd be more than happy to take it. And he essentially said, well, sure, we can do that. In retrospect, it's pretty amazing. There are people who would give their eye teeth to be in atmospheric science in Boulder. And for me to just stumble in through a back door that has long since closed, they got to do security clearances on you now and all sorts of stuff that they didn't have to do back then. So I started working full-time at NOAA in 1976. Everything was going just great. My career was fine. I loved the mountains. I had a nice group of friends. My romantic life was a shambles. And I'd date somebody for a year or so, and then it just, something was missing. And so generally, almost always I'd break it off. And eventually I thought, okay, I'm 40 years old. This is a problem that ought to be addressed. And I remember walking to the employee assistance counselor. And I'd gone to a therapist once when I was in graduate school, but that didn't sort of take. But I thought, okay, I'm going to make myself vulnerable and get some therapy. I remember sweat dripping down my sides. I could feel it. Wet. And so I started some therapy. And eventually from therapy, I learned that, well, my mother wasn't perfect. It was shocking. My first therapist was really into anger and pointed out some things that mother was a human. And it was really hard to adjust that and get my mind around that. And he eventually suggested I might want to try a 12-step program like, a 12-step program like Al-Anon, which I actually went to one meeting, and people would, I don't know how many of you are familiar with 12 steps, but people would pour out their, hi, I'm Bill, I'm blah, 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 and pour out their guts, and everybody would then say, well, thank you, Bill, and move on to the next one. And I think, what are they doing? Why aren't they helping him? And I thought, these people are crazy. And so I left for 2 more years of therapy. So, let's see, I'll talk more. It's actually my sister, Marilyn, my oldest sister, who 12-stepped me. She had a big weight problem for many years as an adult. And she eventually decided that her problem with food was the same as our father's problem with alcoholism. And so she found her way to Overeaters Anonymous and lost the weight and has been healthy ever since. She eventually, from that, discovered Adult Children of Alcoholics. She sent me this book and said, yeah, I don't know, you might find something in the book that resonates. And, so I read it and discovered, whoa, this sounds like stuff that I'm pretty familiar with, behaviors I'm pretty familiar with in my current life. And so she 12-stepped me, got me into ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics, and then Al-Anon. It's changed my life. We're going to have a program hour on February 21st, Spirituality in the 12 Steps. That's Kelsey and Deanne possibly, and if her schedule allows. And I know a lot of others here have a deep involvement in the 12 Steps. The 12 Steps have a concept of higher power, which is one of the things that moved me from the Unitarian Church, where I was attending before this, to the Quaker meeting. Because at least this Unitarian Church in Boulder, back then, had a sense that if you just thought about things hard enough, you really could do it yourself. And the Quakers, I'd heard and discovered to be true, have a sense that there is something beyond that can be tapped. Somebody said, maybe somebody knows who said this, the difference between philosophy and religion is surrender. And in Al-Anon, surrender is a big thing. And I think among Quakers, surrender to a higher power is pretty critical to our worship. 1992, when I was 48, was a year of big change for me. I finally made it into the opera chorus in Denver Opera Chorus. And it turns out, I'm an excellent reader of music. And so, all the baritones crowded around me to learn the music. But then, once they learned the music, I discovered that they had operatic voices, and I didn't. And so these dummies who couldn't read music worth a damn were singing all circles around me, but I tried to keep up and really kind of overstrained my voice. I'd been having vocal problems before. So I just didn't really enjoy the operas at all because I was worried that I couldn't sing. I was prone to coughing fits, didn't want to have a coughing fit on stage. It was a huge amount of work commuting to Denver. It was like having 2 full-time jobs. And after the opera was over, I thought, well, my voice will come back without all this singing, but it didn't come back. So I looked around for where I could get some vocal help. And I found a couple in Boulder that teach the Alexander technique. That's a vocal technique developed by a Shakespearean actor who lost his voice, and by postural adjustment, basically got back to it. And I enjoyed Alexander technique tremendously. Interestingly, they also had a Zen practice. They were 2 Zen teachers, and so they had on Sunday nights meditation sitting at their house. Well, that was the start of something. Also, I decided after the opera that, well, I'm 48. I'd really been waiting to find a life partner to travel with. And I thought, well, hell, I haven't found a life partner. I may as well just take the kind of trips I'd like to take. And I thought, I discovered Esalen on the coast of California. I'd looked at it before and it looked just too new agey and shishi for me. But I looked at the catalog and they were giving a course called Massage and Zen that summer. So I went out to Esalen. I actually got to go out for a day before I took the course because I had business near there. And they have a meditation hall made out of a water tank, about a 30-foot circular redwood box with a beautiful maple floor and a circular tan around it. And I just sat and meditated, listening to the Pacific Ocean, and spent time in the hot tubs. And I thought, and the change I felt in just one day at Esalen, I thought, holy cow, what is a 5-day course in Esalen going to do? Well, I did go to the course, Massage and Zen. It was wonderful, and went back to Esalen several other times that fall because I had business in Monterey near there. I decided that maybe science was no longer doing it for me, and maybe I wanted to become a massage therapist. Bonnie laughs hysterically at this because I'm not the world's greatest massage guy. And so I told my bosses that I told them I was going to take 6 months leave for spiritual renewal and then return. In my mind, I figured I'd return long enough to find another job, but I didn't want to be job looking during the 6 months. I really wanted spiritual renewal. I went to a Zen center for 4 weeks. I met the guy who's now my Zen teacher, Norman Fisher. at Green Gulch Farm near Sausalito. And I went to Pendle Hill for 3 weeks and had a terrible time at Pendle Hill, but a very important one. There was a cadre of radical feminists at Pendle Hill who viewed, I could say more about this, but I did 18 years ago. Actually, they viewed rational thought as a white male tool for dominance. And I felt kind of like I was at the Salem witch trials, because I was judged by the color of my skin, the age of myself, my background. And driving back from there, I realized, I actually like science. I actually like rational thought, and I think it's pretty powerful. The scientists who invented the medicine that opened my lungs when I was 8, I like science. And so rather than becoming a massage therapist, I went back to NOAA, and I said, I'll just be a bench scientist. I'll do whatever work needs to be done. And I sort of gave up having a scientific career just to do programming. I taught a course at continuing ed, because this was a goal that sort of gelled for me, that I wanted to teach about computers and technology and also ethics. And I wanted to teach adults, not freshmen. And I actually did that. Annie was in my course. And I did it. It was great. Yeah, it was that first year. The first year we did a lot of cherry picking. People in all walks of technology have been looking for a course like this and took it. And we had a really strong group of people. The second year it was a lot of people who needed a sociology credit. And the third year not enough people signed up. And I actually discovered I enjoyed doing the internet and technology more than I enjoyed talking about it. So I was okay going back to work. And in fact, 18 years ago, I said, that had just happened. And I said, my only concern is that while I was teaching this course, I took half time off from work. And I loved the distance from work. I could, just in a half time, I could kind of do what needed to be done. I wasn't too involved with stuff. And I was kind of unhappy that I was having to go back to work full time. Well, now I'm working 30% time, and I can tell you it's great. So, a lot's happened since 18 years ago, and one of the things that's happened is that woman over there. Given my father and mother's marriage, I had to unlearn a lot about intimate relationships. Somehow in Bonnie, I found a safe environment, a safe person, with whom to put into practice all the mostly theoretical knowledge I gained through therapy, now meditation, and the 12 steps. We met in 1994, a few weeks before Annie and I and Sonny and Tom Moan and a few others went to Costa Rica. So I said, I want to take you out, but I'm leaving the country. So will you come to this opera with me in 3 weeks or 4 weeks? And I took her to her first opera, and that was the start of something. Bonnie and I fell in love in quantum jumps. The quantum jumps were definitely of a spiritual nature. There's Sonny. We went to Costa Rica too. And but also day by day. The day-by-day stuff's probably also spiritual, but not quite so evidently. The first quantum jump was on the first major trip we took, which was to Vancouver. There's a garden at the University of British Columbia called the Natobe Memorial Garden. It's the most authentic, supposedly the most authentic Japanese garden in the Western Hemisphere. It has a path through it that takes you through all the stages of life. It starts with a turbulent waterfall of birth, and it goes zigzagging kind of through the troubles of adolescence, and so on. So I suggested to Bonnie that I was a little more familiar with silence and solitude than she was at that time. I suggested we walk through the garden in individual solitude and in silence in order to appreciate it. And so she went walking, I went walking. It's just one path, but she walked on ahead. And I found myself, at one point, she was just starting to go over the bridge of midlife. And I found myself running to catch up with her to hold her hand so we could walk over the bridge of midlife together. I found that a very moving moment, and I found out later from her that she found it a moving moment too, didn't you? Well, that. The second quantum jump had to do with a long continuity story for me. I have to go back to college. A friend of mine, a history professor guy, read me this story, read a bunch of us at lunch one day. This story takes about 20 minutes. It's written by a psychiatrist named Alan Wheelis, and it's called The Illusionless Man and the Visionary Maid. And he just did it over lunch. It was just a thrilling story, really remarkable story. It just resonated for me. I got a copy, just a Xerox copy. It wasn't a Xerox copy, they're a multi-lift copy. And had it, about 15 pages, and I had it around the house. As a matter of fact, I had it around the house for 28 years. I don't file things sometimes, and and even longer. And at one of those years, this was 1991, I guess, Bonnie and I had just started living together in my house. And I was at work, we're out one day, and she just discovered it and lay down on the couch to start reading it. And I'll read you the first little bit of it. Because, well, once upon a time, there was a man who had no illusions about anything. While still in the crib, he had learned that his mother was not always kind. At 2, he had given up fairies. Witches and hobgoblins disappeared from his world at 3. At 4, he knew that rabbits at Easter lay no eggs. And at 5, on a cold night in December, with a bitter little smile, he said goodbye to Santa Claus. Well, he eventually grew up, and he goes on. On Sundays, he walked in the park, threw bread at the ducks, dry French bread, stone hard, would stamp on it with his heel, gather up the pieces and walk along the pond, throwing it out to the avid ducks paddling after him, thinking glumly that they would be just as hungry again tomorrow. His name was Henry. One day in the park, he met a girl who believed in everything. In the forest, she still glimpsed fairies, heard them whisper. Bunnies hopped for her at Easter, laid brilliant eggs. At Christmas, hoofbeats shook the roof. She was disillusioned at times and would flounder, gasp desperately like a fish in sand, but not for long, would quickly, sometimes instantly, find something new, and actually never gave up any illusion, but would lay it aside when necessary, forget it, and whenever it was needed back, it would come. Her name was Laura Bell. And when she saw a bearded young man in the park, alone among the couples, stomping on the hard bread, tossing it irritably to the quacking ducks, she exploded into illusions about him like a Roman candle over a desert. They talked about love, beauty, feeling, value, love, life, work, death, and always she came back to love. They argued about everything, differed on everything, agreed on nothing, and so she fell in love with him. The story goes on, and without being untrue to either of their personalities, these two are somehow able to make a relationship and a life together. So I came back home that day, and Bonnie greets me with tears. Said, did you leave this for me to see? I said, no, I've had it for 28 years. It just was around the house. And she said, well, it's us. And I said, well, yeah. Although she didn't exactly fall in love with me as immediately and as thoroughly as Laura Bell. It took a while for her and a while for me. But and so it has been. Where am I? Yes. So that was a special moment for us. We made a decision early on to seek couples counseling together. The rest of that trip to Vancouver wasn't as delightful as the moments in the Toby Garden. And it was a bigger jump for Bonnie than for me, and I'm grateful. Our therapist over the years has been very, very helpful to us. And a good friend of Bonnie's, now dead, said, the two of you couldn't be more different intellectually and couldn't be more similar emotionally. This we think is quite true and provides many wonderful opportunities for growth. At our Clearness Committee for Marriage, Dick Cunahan, after talking with us, called us both lucky ducks. And indeed, we feel that way. We have a new definition of perfect. No one's objectively perfect, and for many years I looked for a perfect woman. She would be a classical musician who would play cello and very intellectual, and that didn't work very well. No one's objectively perfect. Neither Bonnie nor I are perfect, but we can be perfect for each other, and we are. So it's been a spiritual growth thing to learn that. I'm very grateful for our relationship. It's a combination, the quality of it is the result of hard work and grace from somewhere beyond. I want to talk about the meeting. It's supposed to be one paragraph down at 40 minutes, but I'll do that. The Quaker meeting. I was going to leave this out. I mentioned it at the first time, but for a reason that'll be obvious, I'll mention it now. My first exposure to Quakerism was at the University of Chicago at Rockefeller Chapel during the middle of the Vietnam War. And I heard a Quaker give the sermon. He was working in Africa, and he talked about how the two sides had been having a war, and they decided not to have a war anymore. And he, as a Quaker, was in a position to talk to both sides to get them to that state, and so the war stopped. And I thought, wow, war is a choice. Countries who are at war can decide not to be at war anymore. And Quakers who seek that of God in everyone can act in a way that can make that sort of thing happen. And I told this story, and then 25 years later I actually came into the Quaker meeting for the first time. I'm a little slow, but that was a big memory for me. I was telling this story to Peter Woodrow, and he said, you know, I think that's Sarah Williams Mann's father, Cale. So I mentioned to Sarah this morning that I probably wasn't going to tell that story again for lack of time. And she said, well, you should know Cale's in the last days of his life. He's under hospice care now. And so Cale Williams, the father of Sarah Williams Mann of our meeting, who's also come to our meeting, is the man who first introduced me to Quakerism. And so I want to honor him today, now, with that. I like the idea of higher power. That's why I'm here. I like giving vocal ministry. And I like the discernment of when one should give it. I love the flow chart out there. It's made for a scientist engineer. And the questions is it from you? Is it also beyond you? Resonate deeply with me. And I love our focus on truth. Truth is, as you know, from my very early days, something I value highly. And I love the community. I was so happy to return from that disastrous time at Pendle Hill. I had actually tears in my eyes to be back with this community of people I love, with who that is my spiritual home. I have to say, though, as a theology, I lean towards Zen's sense that evil and good are woven in a continuous fabric. That we can't always know what is evil and what is good, and can't always define right action. We say we value truth-telling, and we value pacifism. And the Zen approach is, yes, but what's appropriate for this moment? I think of Bruce Neal. He was a member of this meeting, died long ago, very big man. During the first half of World War II, he was a conscientious objector. During the second half, he was led to join up. Turned out he was an excellent marksman, so they made him a sniper. So he vowed when he came back never to speak in Quaker meeting again, which is our loss and his loss. But he attended Quaker meeting, and he was not thrown out of Quaker meeting. So we have our testimonies. Whether to always clutch them rigidly or not is something I feel Zen's approach of, get your heart right and take the action appropriate to the moment is something that resonates with me. My annual silent Zen retreats are a high point of my year. I love the silence. If you think sitting in silence for an hour is good, try 7 days of it. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. But in Quakerism, I find a shift between the silence and the action, in the sense of perhaps being led to give vocal ministry, or more often being led to listen to vocal ministry. I had a wonderful experience as friend at the door one time. As you know, the friend is supposed to encourage people to sit quietly in the lobby. And so I did. I would go sit quietly in the lobby, settle into silence. But then somebody else would come at the door. My job was also to greet them. So 3 or 4 or 5 times I would sit in silence, get up when I needed to, take the action I needed to, come back into the silence. And so that rapid sort of shift between silence and action is something that's more Quaker than Zen that I love. Men's group here has been a tremendous bond for 25 years plus, 28 years. I'm 5 minutes over. I thought I'd talk a little about my 4 years as associate clerk and clerk, but I could leave that out. You're probably not interested. All right.
Hey, I could swing an extra 5 minutes.
It's a 4-year vacation. Okay. I wouldn't have left it out. It's a 4-year vacation from having to determine long-term goals. The weekly goal was to serve the meeting. And for someone who likes to who agonizes over a long-term outlook, having that weekly goal was a good thing. And I had permission from the meeting to behave as clerk. I got to let go of opinions, which was actually much easier than I thought it would be. Maybe not forever, but certainly doing it for a couple of years is a wonderful exercise. And it provides a clear focus in life. Enough so that laying down the clerkship sort of leaves you with a real sense of being in outer darkness, which I'll say more about. And it's a strong motivation to like everybody, or at least to cherish everybody. And it was something to grow around. It's a combination of letting things unfold and taking action. I didn't get the balance perfect, but maybe perfect enough for the day. So what about now? What are the differences between this spiritual journey and the one 18 years ago? I think I talk in capital letters less often. A friend of mine in college called me Eeyore. And my mother always used to say, "You sound like a college professor," as a child. And I often professed about a lot. I think I'm more down to earth than then. I have much less anxiety about the future. I spent a good bit of time toward the end of my spiritual journey last time really worrying about, well, what is next? What is next for me? And I don't have that sense now. I quoted from the Sermon on the Mount, reminding me and us, who can add 1 cubit to their life by worrying? I was pleased to see I'm not in that place right now. There's less years to worry about ahead of me. I have a lot more gratitude now. And one of the nice things about being old is you know how things turned out. I remember sharing this at an Al-Anon meeting. A young woman in her 30s was saying, "Oh my God, am I going to find a relationship? Am I going to have a family? Am I going to be able to blah, 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 blah?" And I said, well, one of the advantages of being old is you know how things turned out. I would have liked, I think, to have had children. It didn't happen, and it's not really an option now. And so I know how it turned out. I could have a lot of regret or a little regret, or I can just say, life is what it is. And that gives you so much less to worry about. I'm still working 30% time. I worry a little that, here I said I didn't worry, no. I do worry a little that I should be doing something more spiritual with my time than the stuff I do at NOAA. But then I think back, I've always been this way in graduate school. When I would come home, I would walk on the beach at Lake Michigan and agonize. Does physics really help the world? Should I be going out and feeding the poor? Agonized about it. But, as it turned out, I always did what, how did I phrase this? In seeking God's will for me, I've generally done what I loved. And that's worked well for me so far. Ah, yes. I've gotten into memorization. I got motivated by John Hyler, who gave a vocal ministry of Shakespeare's sonnet 116 on love and marriage. That was very appropriate. And I thought, oh, he knows that whole sonnet. So I went home, and over the course of some weeks, I memorized that beautiful sonnet of Shakespeare's. And I thought, well, we do at these Zen retreats, we do chants. And some of them are in Japanese, and some of them are in English. And I'd memorized a couple of the short Japanese ones, and I do that as part of my meditation. And I thought, well, I will memorize the Metta Sutta, which is the sutta for love, about loving kindness, which is kind of, for the moment, my mantra of where I plan to head in terms of my life ahead, as far as I can see. And to test myself of my memorization, I'm going to present it to you now. And I rehearsed it some with Bonnie. I also did it flawlessly this morning while I meditated. It's better if I do it with my eyes closed. So this is the Buddhist Sutta, the Metta Sutta. Metta Sutta. This is what should be accomplished by the one who is wise, who seeks the good and has obtained peace. Let one be... I brought a cheat sheet. Yes, okay. Let one be strenuous, upright, and sincere, without pride, easily contented and joyous. Let one not be submerged by the things of the world. Let one not take upon oneself the burden of riches. Let one's senses be controlled. Let one be wise but not puffed up. Let one not desire great possessions even for one's family. Let one do nothing that is mean or that the wise would reprove. May all beings be happy. May they be joyous and live in safety. All living beings, whether weak or strong, in high or middle or low realms of existence, small or great, visible or invisible, near or far, born or to be born, may all beings be happy. Let no one deceive another, nor despise any being in any state. Let none by anger or hatred wish harm to another. Even as a mother, at the risk of her life, watches over and protects her only child, so with a boundless mind should one cherish all living things, suffusing love over the entire world, above, below, and all around without limit. So let one cultivate an infinite goodwill toward the whole world. Standing or walking, sitting or lying down, during all one's waking hours, let one cultivate the way with gratitude. Not holding to fixed views, endowed with insight, freed from sense appetites, one who accomplishes the way will be freed from the duality of birth and death. So, I prefer to think of freed from the duality of birth and death in the Christian way of death, where is thy sting? I'm 71 years old. I'm losing contemporaries to death and dementia. But I think back to another aspect of the Natobe Memorial Garden. This path through life goes over the bridge of midlife, and it continues on, and I was walking along on it, and there's a portion of the path that goes through a lovely grove of trees with moss on the ground and trees above. And then the path stops. And the grove of trees continues on. But you don't go there. The path has stopped. I'm more and more aware, as I get older, that I'm not going to see how things turn out. This Quaker meeting is going to go on sometime after I'm gone. Boulder's going to still have issues about growth after I'm gone. People will be falling in love and falling out of love and living and dying after I'm gone. 18 years ago, I mentioned that and said, that gives me some comfort. I don't feel so much comfort in it as it all gets closer now, 18 years later, but I think I have some equanimity about it. We live, I think about how we die. My mother didn't die with a great healing of differences, and we had some differences as I was an adult and confronted her about how imperfect she'd been. Though I know now she'd just been a victim of alcoholism like my father. And we didn't really have heart-to-heart talks like one would hope for an ideal death. But after she died, I realized that ultimately it didn't matter. Just having lived is enough grace for all of us. In Quaker funerals, we generally, through honesty, hear the good and the bad, shared honestly about the person, and we can appreciate the person in the wholeness of their life. So whether I'm able to fulfill the intentions of the Metta Sutta, and I know I'm not, I try, or not, won't matter. Just having lived would be enough. Just having lived with you in the spiritual community will be enough. And now we've got 5 minutes left. So feel free, if you have questions, to ask. And thank you for this rare opportunity. Yes.
So I'm wondering, what part of physics did you like to study? Because I always felt that the study of magnetism would be a gateway study to understand the whole universe for some reason.
I got my degree in high energy particle physics, but my career has been in atmospheric physics, but truth to tell, it's really been computer programming and statistics, evaluating the quality of weather forecast models and evaluating the quality of the data that goes into those models to help them forecast. Deanne?
I had a similar theme. You talked about that experience of deep knowing that you were part of the infinite. And I'm wondering how that manifests for you working in a place that looks at global stuff and they seem connected to me.
It doesn't resonate so well with me. The universe I was seeing was a lot bigger than the atmosphere that surrounds our Earth. The deep sense, however, of not having anything to prove in order to justify my existence here has allowed me to thrive pretty well in a, well, I would say government bureaucracy, although our lab is government. It's not in Washington, D.C., and we're reasonably well protected, but we still have had to deal with all the government stuff. And so I'd say the only connection has been the strength I've gained from that spiritual moment to not be too buffeted by the political turbulence that comes my way, comes around occasionally. Yes, Annie?
I'd like to know, your presentation was a lot about emotion, or that side of yourself versus the intellect, rational. And I'd like to know if you feel as though that's part of your journey now to render yourself more vulnerable in that way, to not just the body, but to those of us who know you and care for you.
Yes, I think that's about not speaking in capital letters so much and not making pronouncements. A friend told me he thought I'd gotten softer as a result of being clerk and as a result of being a husband. And if I've gotten softer, well, that's a good thing. I've come a ways from that boy who was looking at the tooth on the sink and rolling his eyes and thinking, Father couldn't even do that right. And I think I'm in a better place for it.
More forgiving?
I think so. Yeah. Yes, Cindy.
I just wanted to affirm your perception about the end of the path. So one of the things that I do is I direct the Pittsburgh Threshold Choir, which is is a group of women who sing at the bedsides of people who are very ill or dying, mostly hospice patients. And I often say, we've been at the bedside when people have died, and we've been there singing, and it's an amazing experience. And I often say to my singers that the only difference between those of us who are doing the singing and the people to whom we are singing is that while we all walk the same path, those people to whom we are singing, they can see the end of the path. So just as you could physically see the end of the path in the garden, the people to whom we sing can see the end of the path. But mostly, as we're going along, we can only walk alongside.
Mhm.
So that helps you deal with your growing uncertainty about the end of the path.
Thank you.
Well, I feel that I'm so grateful to have met you, and without you, this would be a big missing place in our lives.
Thank you. Thank you. Yuenta, did you have a?
Oh, that felt like a good thing. I would echo that.
Well, Bill, thank you very much. I want to invite any of you who have already given a spiritual journey who are up for part 2, please contact me. Please don't feel you have to compete with this. Just whatever is authentic and real for you in your life experience and your spiritual experience is how we become a real community. So these spiritual journeys are a very special part of what we want to offer to each other as program committee. So please contact me if you have even the slightest inkling that you might want to explore yourself some and share it with the rest of us. Thank you. Well, let's have a little bit of silence and then we'll go about the rest of our day.